Laban, thank you so much for giving us your time today on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you on. Can you give the listeners just a brief overview of who you are? What do you do at the moment? Where are you? A brief intro.
Yep, absolutely. Because the picture doesn't quite tell the story. I'm actually located in the Tampa Bay area in Florida, in the United States. We're having some unusually chilly weather in Florida. Hence the cold weather gear, which means it's about the same temperature as maybe the warmest day I ever had when I lived in Leeds in the UK. So, body's adjusted just a little bit.
Yeah, which is cool. And we met back here in Leeds, obviously, years ago, but didn't start working together formally until sort of the beginning of last year. Tell us a bit about your life, I guess, pre us working together. What kind of background did you used to have in fitness?
Yeah, absolutely. So to rewind, because I think that really informs the journey I've been on over the last year. If you rewind 20 years coming out of my teens in college, I would have considered myself always sort of an overweight kid. And of course, in hindsight, like we all know, it wasn't really, right? We'd all die to be the size we were when we were 18. But it comes back kind of a recurring theme of the stories we tell ourselves, right? So I was more of an academic kid. So the story I told myself was that I'm not an athlete, right? I don't work out. And then as I gained weight over time, um, like so many people, you would go into sort of the anecdotal fad that you were hearing about, right? And it was always this Spartan, ultra intense, buckle down, whether it's no carbs or no booze or whatever. Um, and of course, you lose weight and you gain it back um, over time. Uh, and then, and this is sort of leads up to just before we met, over time, I moved to the UK. And so then I'd gotten into running. So the story I told myself was, it's about exercise. Okay. So I didn't exercise. So now I'm going to exercise. And, I ramped up my running quite a bit. And it was fun, right? Did a lot of 5Ks and then did a half marathon every year as like a big goal, but still didn't lose weight. And, in a moment of frustration, hired a personal trainer. I'm like, fine, I'm just going to throw money at this. So, 5 days a week, 6 o'clock in the morning, working out like an animal. One of those sort of ends with a cardio finisher that almost makes you throw up, right? So
Mhm.
like felt really good. I'm definitely exercising. And it's funny, like the weight didn't come off, and that didn't really make any sense to me. And that's about when I met you. I changed gyms. It was more of a hit style um, exercise program, and it was fun. Definitely, it was community based, right? So it was enjoyable, and that was a breakthrough for me. Was that exercise can be fun and not
Mhm.
about punishment. Um, but still, I wasn't losing any weight, and I was like mega working out every morning. One personal training session a week. And one thing that struck me on your Instagram feed was this idea that one, it's about evidence, right? There's no shortcuts. It's about a caloric deficit. And that seems a little bit obvious at first until you realize that you've known that for 20 years
Mhm.
and that's never been effective, right? It's like, okay, great, right? Caloric deficit, all these diet programs only work because of a caloric deficit, but there's a so what. And I think that's where I got intrigued in your sort of philosophy around mindset. So like zoom out from the activity and working your tail off and making everything hard. You know, what's your mindset? How do you talk to yourself? What are the leading indicators? What are the behaviors that you focus on? Because like many people, every time you step on the scales becomes your enemy, right?
Mhm.
There's an emotional response. You feel bad about yourself. You step on it less. You have less feedback. And so I think that's kind of when I was following you and realized, okay, this is a guy who believes that weight loss and fitness should be enjoyable. It should be lifelong. It should only be based on what the data shows. I think, your picture where you're holding a beer and you're like, if your diet doesn't allow you to drink beer, it's not a diet, it's a prison sentence or something like that, right? I was like,
Yeah.
okay, this is a guy who gets it, because the all or nothing stuff just hadn't worked. And um, so, so that's, I think, was sort of when the light turned on. I was like, okay, I need to work with somebody, because knowledge by itself isn't effective, right? I need to work
Yeah.
with somebody who can help guide me on this journey.
Cool. I need to definitely recycle that Instagram post if that's what was the turning point. I do find that.
Different for different folks, but certainly I was like, okay, I can get healthier and have an enjoyable lager every once in a while.
Yeah, because as you said, it's that all or nothing and that punishment of exercise for you just hadn't been working at all. Right. It's like no
Yeah.
matter how hard you tried exercise wise, it just wasn't making a difference.
And, I have tracked my weight now regularly since 2012, right? So now I have data to look at, and I can see the valleys and the peaks, right? I have lost weight. So when people give me advice about weight loss in the past, I had a sense of indignation. Like, don't tell me how to lose weight. I've lost more weight than you'll ever lose in your life.
Mhm.
The catch is I've just gained it back, right? So there's obviously here.
Yeah, so cumulatively over every attempt, you were like, I've lost more weight than you could ever imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, the key in all of this is what's sustainable, right? We're
Mm.
not going to live Spartan lives. We're not going to be locked up away from people, eating chicken breast and green beans. We're not going to not be social, right? And so that was the frustration that had sort of I'd internalized, was there very clearly has to be a way of doing this sustainably over, because we look at a frustratingly slow amount of weight loss. Let's say you do a half pound per week, which nobody would be happy with on a diet. But if I had done that for the last decade, I would be in incredible shape. So it's going
Mm.
away from big, explosive, charismatic gestures to, slow, incremental, boring, sustainable. And that's what, really made a difference for me.
Yeah, and that brings me actually to a couple of questions. And first one would be, with how many times, I guess, did you try with this weight loss thing? Because people usually have like peaks and troughs with their efforts. And so with that, how did you then, give it one more go? Because oftentimes it's those failures that hold people back from trying again.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of big efforts that I could really point to making a significant difference, I've probably done it 4 times in my adult life of a decent amount of weight loss.
Mm.
At my max, I was close to 300 pounds. And sorry for those folks who rightly think in kilograms. My brain only works in pounds. I never made the stones conversion. So at my max, I was close to 300 pounds. And so when I started with you, I wasn't nearly that heavy, but that had been a long time. So I at least had some success, right, of not blowing up to my max. But 4 probably substantial efforts. And again, the common themes were ultra disciplined, ultra focused. I remember the time I went without drinking anything for a very long period of time. And of course, then it just builds up as a bigger thing in your mind, right?
Mm.
I remember going camping with friends in the States before I moved overseas. And it was in my no drinking phase. And we're sitting around the campfire and I'm thinking, well, this sucks. I'm just that guy, right? And so that sociable thing just makes those efforts sort of doomed to being 3 or 4 months in time and just, blowing up for a whole host of reasons.
It makes you more likely to rebound, I find, because if you're that restrictive, you then think, oh my God, I can't wait until I can do those things again. But you also perceive those things maybe as negative actions, which then compound themselves to doing it more.
Well, and that's the thing. I didn't appreciate the idea of having a positive relationship with food, right? Before I started working with you, because there's this idea that builds up in your head that is just silly. And that is, okay, bread is bad, fruit's bad, beer is bad. You end up not eating strawberries because you've convinced yourself that that sugar is bad, right?
Yeah.
And and that's all crazy, right? And so it's like, you go eat some sort of like healthy food, and you look at the nutrients, and it's like chock full of calories, right? And it's like, okay, maybe if I were like a professional athlete, this might be healthy. So that whole positive relationship with food helped me have much more resilience. When those things do happen, right? When Christmas happens, right? You enjoy Christmas. You don't splurge a little bit and then beat yourself up over it, right? And the other thing was I know this is different for everybody, but weighing myself every day. And then your advice was to take the average for the week, because I had no idea how much my body naturally cycles in weight throughout the week.
Mm-hmm.
So a decade ago, I would have stepped on the scales on a Monday morning, which I now know Monday is the highest, and I would have felt deflated, right? Because I'm only tracking myself, and only validation is the scales. And I would have seen that, and it would have just said, you know what? It's not working. And I would have left the scale, gotten dressed, and just made things worse throughout the day. Whereas now I know Monday, Tuesday are high, Friday is low, and it averages out. So that whole mindset of not having this all or nothing, this internally negative feeling about foods that I eat, eating fruit, right? So if you have some, it's like, so what, right? Just get back to it, or come up with a plan, right? And that's the other thing you and I did, is we'd come up with some plans about, okay, if this thing's going to happen, the social event's going to happen, what are some things we can do to make sure that we approach it the right way, that we enjoy ourselves, and then keep progress afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's definitely about having that balance between, you're going to attend social events, so you can't let those derail you, even if it is about, you're going to have a few too many beers than you probably would during the week, because it's what people usually think is, oh man, like I've gone so off track. What's the point? I might as well keep going. It's having that resilience to think, well, it's only one night.
Yep.
I'm only as good as my next meal.
Yep. Well, and I think, again, going back to something that you had reinforced, if people actually do the math on how many calories surplus it takes to gain a pound or a kilogram, and it's an insane amount of calories, right? So one night having a few beers or having a dessert is not going to wreck anything, right? But then we have all this sort of negative, like, oh, I went off my plan, I had a creme brulee, that's chock full of sugar, how dare I? And then the next morning it's like, I'm off the wagon anyway, let's have some French toast, So I think just breaking that, and even though it sounds a little hokey to some people, just being self-forgiving, about those things, it made my Christmas and New Year's this year 100 times more enjoyable than the previous year, because the last year I just felt bad the whole time. And then that just sort of sends you in a downward spiral.
Yeah, like it doesn't actually help you to feel guilty about food or exercise, right? It's just actually makes you feel 10 times worse.
Yeah, and in fact, it probably actually makes you eat worse, because you have this sort of like, I'm defeated mindset, instead of like, that was nice. We go on and adjust a little bit and keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you think that positive change in your relationship with food? I think, when did that strike a chord with you? Because I think a lot of people wouldn't even relate to the fact that needs changing.
Well, I think before I started working with you on some of the content, like, it made sense, right? And there's enough other material out there that people can come across or can read, that reinforces that idea that the mindset is a really important part of habit formation, right? And so I'd come across that in sort of business coaching, and so it resonated when I saw that with you. But I don't think it was until several months into working with you that sort of really became real for me. So the first thing that I thought was wild when I first started working with you a year ago is none of our conversations were about cutting and being restrictive. And that was weird for me, because because in my mind, I sort of thought, okay, when is the hammer going to drop? If you remember, the early focus wasn't even on weight. We never even talked about weight, I don't think, for a couple of months.
Mm.
It was about increasing my protein intake. And that was such a bizarre and positive thing for me, because instead of a cutting mindset, restrictive mindset, it was about an adding mindset.
Mm.
And I ended up finding myself focusing on consuming more protein. Now, of course, we ended up talking about the time we were calorie counting, right? And we had some good targets set up. But still, I was in an adding mindset, which was very alien to me. And I think that helped, from a positive mindset perspective. And then getting into, the food I was consuming, which wasn't some radical departure, right? I wasn't spending 5 hours food prepping on a Sunday, right? I wasn't, it really focused on fitting into what was a fairly busy professional life, right? Instead of being very disruptive. And again, it wasn't like I went teetotal on, foods I enjoyed, or beers, right? Or having a barbecue, out on the grill. And so I think it took probably 3 to 4 months for that to become real, to kind of go from being a conceptual thing to really feeling, and being around people where they're like, oh, you're allowed to eat bread,
Yeah.
or, oh, you're having a beer, like, shame on you, you're cheating. And so over time, you develop a sense of satisfaction. I'm being a normal person, living a normal life, building better habits that, become more automatic over time.
How did you deal with that with office culture? Because just to provide the listeners some context, with you working out in the States, but back when we started working together last January, there wasn't the coronavirus, and you were going to the office and traveling a lot with work. As you said, it was a busy work life that we worked around. It wasn't about, right, eat all of these exact meals and cook all of this exact food. But how did you deal with office culture of people saying, oh wow, like you're allowed bread, or oh, you shouldn't be eating that, or you shouldn't be drinking that, and also people seeing that change in you, because a lot of people get afraid of that new change.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is, anybody who's spent a lot of time being overweight and has gone through diets that haven't worked develop a certain sense of shame about failure, right? So the very first thing is, you don't feel good about people knowing that you're on a diet, because it heightens the risk of it not working and then you feeling like a failure, right?
Mm.
And so any sort of like big, funky, obvious diet, I think is difficult for people who spend a lot of time being overweight, because of that self-consciousness. So I think the first thing was, it was nice just nobody knowing, right? I was just doing my thing. And the other thing is, because we went through a phase of tracking calories, you helped me. And it's so simple in hindsight. I'll never forget. You went through all the menus of all the restaurants surrounding my office.
Mm.
And you created a list of, these are good meals to eat, which all just turned out to be around 600 calories.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, I can go to Chick-fil-A, right? Like, on my I can't go list, or I can go to the Greek restaurant, right? Because again, in the past, it was like, you're either like microwave chicken breast and green beans, or you're off the wagon. And so that was the first thing, was nothing felt restrictive. I was going to normal places, having food during the daytime. And then, spent a lot of time having professional dinners with colleagues and customers. And again, those previously were challenging because they were frequent, and it's very easy to choose high calorie foods when you're going out to eat at a steakhouse or a restaurant. And so I remember we would talk about, okay, what are the events of next week, and what's our plan for them? Mm. And so inevitably, that would get me into a proactive stance of looking at the menu online and thinking about it. I think partly just sort of like visualizing, okay, I'm going to have the salmon. I'm going to have it blackened because that's tasty. and it just doesn't, have a lot of coating or anything on it. I'm gonna have some veg, and I'm gonna go light on the carbs because I'm gonna have 2 beers,
Yeah.
something like that. And it wasn't super restrictive, but it was thinking about it ahead of time because these things all pile up, right? And if you're doing a 500 calorie surplus every night, 3 nights professionally, and then the weekend you're in sort of fun social weekend mode, you're suddenly at a 2,000 calorie surplus
Mm.
without even doing anything significant. So first, you helping me map out normal restaurants. It wasn't like a bunch of salad bowls and BS like that, right? And again, that was still in the phase where I was trying to increase protein.
Yeah.
So it was a bizarre thing sitting down in the restaurant and being like, okay, I'd like this, but can I have double chicken? Right. So I'm like feeling like I'm eating more.
Mm.
And that was a complete game changer.
Yeah, I remember that. Like, these are your closest places near the office, and so here's a great way to get in a protein heavy lunch with a and think about your overall calorie consumption. And
Yeah.
for anyone listening to this who may be office working, if you're abroad, I know in the UK some people are doing that now if they're essential, but most people are home based and you don't cook a lot at home. Maybe you do shop. Think about those situations where we basically said, right, if you were in an average deficit, you'd be around here. And therefore, your main meals should roughly be around this many calories. And then that was it. We did a bit of calorie counting to get some calibration, but never really massively emphasized it.
Yeah. Well, and that became automated because then, like now, with doing almost no thing, like if I walked up to a hotel breakfast buffet, I instinctively know about what 400 calories is.
Mm-hmm.
And I know how to pick it, and it's not restrictive, and it's not, it doesn't look like I'm doing some weird Spartan breakfast.
No.
And that's the big thing too, is making it easy. And I used to think that was being lazy, but the practicality of it is, and the evidence shows that if you don't make it easy, you won't automate it, right? And so if you're doing some super funky diet that requires a ton of food preparation, and I've done this in the past, right? And you're always focusing on bringing your lunch to work with you. Yeah, I mean, you can manage your calories, but for the average busy person, that requires enough additional effort that you end up failing at that too. So not only have you failed at like these other goals, but now you're not doing this perfect food prep crap. So just making it easy and knowing that, like, okay, I'm busy today, I'm going to go to fast food. And guess what? I can get a 600 calorie with a decent amount of protein at a fast food. And would you ever brag about that, right? Would you ever Instagram that? No. But that was 600 calories and there was good protein, and it's fine. And those things just all make it, I think, easier to automate, to make it part of a habit, as opposed to some big Herculean task that you've got to put all of your energy into, because the
Yeah.
rest of your life is still going on, right? It's still happening.
Yeah, great point, because you can only do the best that you can do in that moment, and there's too much negativity around fast food restaurants, which a lot of which actually now produce very decent food because of the health kick the greater world is going through. But even then, if you were to go to a Burger King and get a big, well, the Big Mac's obviously McDonald's, but a Burger King and get a Whopper with fries. Again, if you're calorie conscious over your day, it's not a bad thing, but it's people seeing it being bad that then derails their progress.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even now, I know that I can swing through a Wendy's drive-through and get the spicy chicken sandwich and apple slices, and I still feel like I'm having a tasty treat, right? That's still scratching an itch. And that's not blowing up. I mean, that's not even indulging in fries, which isn't the end of the world, right? But that's not a bad thing. Whereas in the past, it was like, oh, I've got to have like a whole chicken breast and all this stuff.
Yeah, well, you just add too much pressure on yourself, as you said, because Herculean efforts with fitness, although if stuck to provide quick results, it's the if stuck to and maintenance of that makes the difference, because they're usually too restrictive that makes you feel bad if you stray. And there's just so much to focus on at once. How did you change your mindset around because we said, yeah, let's focus on adding protein first. A lot of people be like, I should be doing more.
Well, I think one of the main things is that we haven't talked about is totally separating exercise from weight loss mentally. And I know that's not, completely scientifically true, but by viewing exercise as a thing that was about providing enjoyment, about providing sort of release and escape, a cathartic outlet, and being about, a lifetime of activity and enjoying life. And then nutrition and food was about weight loss. That did a couple of things. It increased the importance of, the nutrition journey we were on, but it also kind of freed me up to be much happier when I was exercising. Because in the past, I had this sort of like, when I would show up at the gym that you coached at 6 a.m., I had put so much pressure on that gym session to provide me caloric deficit, right? That if I'm not, nearly vomiting at the end of the thing, I didn't do anything, right? And I think one of the things we did early on by doing both, nutrition and exercise was we made exercise enjoyable, right? I'm not a long time gym guy, right? I don't know what I'm doing when I walk in there. And so by you breaking it down to just one, it complemented my morning schedule, right? It was 45 minutes. It was a nice blend of weights and muscles and, a cardio session per week. But it wasn't like I was killing myself every day. And that's all we needed to do, right? Like I'm not going to be, trying to go for a Mr. Universe competition anytime soon. And so I wasn't worried about maxing out. I wasn't worried about what the person next to me was doing, and stuff like that. So I think that can't be overlooked in terms of, the overall positive mindset of feeling good about what I'm doing, focusing on the inputs, focusing on, getting a better relationship with food. And then, I now have worked out 4 times a week for 50 weeks.
Yeah.
That's insane, right? If I set out to do that with that, I'm going to kill myself every morning attitude, I probably would have stopped in March. But, and then, after we get it done, I'm going to go do my, assigned Thursday exercise, right?
Yeah.
And I just go in there and I just follow the recipe.
Yeah, well, it's morning where you are, isn't it? Over in the US, it's early afternoon here in the UK. I think that's one of the key things of changing people's mindset around fitness, though, is it's okay to start small and keep it easy, because actually that way you're going to be more successful and build from that. It's going to change as you go through. It's not always going to be just that small change. It's going to compound.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having that, developing a positive mindset about slow, incremental habit formation as being the positive, as opposed to, I'm going to go in and blow out my biceps every Tuesday, right? It just totally does it. So, and I think, sort of bizarrely, there's so many things that have happened throughout the year that, would have historically derailed me. But, I think partly because I was working with you, there was sort of like this sounding board, that I could keep my resilience up. We could talk through things. But the pandemic, had this happened, I think, in any other year, I probably would have gone classic couch potato, maximum Dorito consumption, and watched all of Netflix. Right?
Yeah.
But somehow, I lost 40 pounds during the pandemic, which, just blows my mind. We used it as an opportunity. If I think back to March, we talked about increasing step count, right? Going from 10,000 steps a day to 12,000 steps a day. I'm fortunate to be in an environment where the weather is good and I could do that. So yeah, I mean, if compared to where things could have been, right? I lost 40 pounds, but I could have easily gained 20 pounds during the pandemic, right? So it feels really good to have weathered some of those challenges and come out the other side, in a pretty positive place mentally and physically.
Yeah, well, not just the pandemic either. You've had other ups and downs, as everybody does, but you in particular had a pretty tricky year with quite
Yeah,
a few
well,
major life events.
yeah, it's sort of funny. If anybody's watching this under the age of 40, this will sound sort of insane, right? Because for all my life, I was fortunate to never, never have to use medical care almost ever, right? Nothing was ever wrong. And you listen to these quote old people talking about their bodies falling apart, and you just sort of blow it off. But yeah, so starting this year, I had this incredible foot pain, which turned out to be gout. Which, if anybody's ever Googled it, you associate this with some, Lord of the Manor, 70 years old eating gravy in his country home in the Cotswolds. But that was extremely painful, right? And it's not like a proud injury to have, right?
Mm,
Like if you blow out your shoulder, you know, doing snatches or something, there's a bit of swagger in the fact that I worked out so much that I injured something maybe, but just your toe hurting, like it's not a particularly proud moment, and
uh,
and I think there were two aspects. One was the physical, obviously. I was in a lot of pain, and you helped me really dial my exercises so that we could still do something, right? Like if you remember, lunges were extremely painful, right?
yeah,
Hyperflexing my toe was extremely painful. So um, that was part of it, is just getting exercises that I could still feel good about doing something and not go off the rails. But the other was the mental side, right? You run into a mental, like anybody who's been injured running or anything, you just kind of feel like, you know, it's over, right? My body's breaking down. I'm just, screw it. I'll sit on the couch. So I think having, working with you also allowed me some to talk to, right? And sort of work my way through that. And I think we had a couple of those episodes, which, were just kind of a big mental setback.
mm,
Uh, but because we were focusing on the inputs and not the outputs, I think I didn't really obsess about the outputs when we are going through that, right? Just being a little bit active, dialing it back a little bit. If you remember too, after a lot of running over the last decade, I started having some Achilles issues. Remember, my ankle got really painful. And again, it's one more thing. You're like, oh, crap. And we changed the cardio for a while, right? And stop pounding the pavement running. Um, and now we're slowly working that back up with interval running on Tuesdays, right? Which,
yeah,
touch wood, has been really fun. But we just adjusted, right? And then I didn't feel like, oh, there's no way I can lose weight because I'm not, maxing cardio every week, right?
mm,
Walking, as it turns out, while it may be associated with mall walkers and old people, really good fat burning exercise, right?
yeah,
Uh, and I had the big ankle issue, and then and you almost can't make this stuff up. If you remember, in September, I was briefly hospitalized.
mm,
It was a big scare, and it turned out to be nothing scary, just with a bad case of vertigo. But again, we had to adjust the PT program because I had no sense of balance. Right, I had
yeah,
the stability of a 92-year-old, and
yeah. I know.
so that week I was out of the hospital. I went from like pushing myself around the block with one of those like a Zimmer frame
Yeah,
to walking holding Deanna's shoulder. So again, that was a big mental setback, right? Because I am too young, 40 now, 43 years old. I'm too young to be experiencing these setbacks, and so I didn't feel very macho in my exercise routine for that following month. But even now, right, we're building the balance back up, and
yeah,
routine we're on now, right, where we're doing um, single-sided deadlifts and stuff, right? That's all, obviously helpful from a strength training perspective, but it also is helpful from a balance perspective. So, and then, in November, I lost my job, which was a big blow. And it's sort of on brand for 2020, right? You're like, you might as well dump everything you possibly can onto this year. It almost makes me not want to tempt the cosmos, right? Um,
not good right now. Yeah,
but we talked about that fairly quickly, and again, it's both working on the mindset side and not getting into this all or nothing mindset, and staying active, right? And so, yeah, I mean, in a year from now, we'll probably look back at those 2 months and say, probably plateaued a little bit, but you know, I kept up a decent exercise routine, didn't go nuts on the food. I think I had to keep a fairly forgiving, resilient mindset through that, which led into Christmas. And this is the first holiday season in my memory that I felt positive throughout the that week or two. Felt good about myself on New Year's Day. Felt good about myself on January 2, right? And and now we're going through January. We're not doing any crazy dry January or any of that stuff that just inevitably results in some giant departure in February and March. So that it's been a hell of a year, right? But in hindsight, I almost couldn't have designed a better year to make sure I was working with a coach than a year that had just so much, so many swerve balls going on.
Absolutely. What impressed me with those periods was your self-resilience of, well, let's keep this going, because a lot of people would hang their hat up at that and say, it's not meant to be, the stars aren't aligned, this isn't the time for me to work on my health and fitness. Whereas we just adjusted the course, and actually those periods where, yeah, you maintained weight, but really we spoke about that too, of saying, well, having periods of weight maintenance is good because you can practice what it's like to have a bit less exercise and a bit more food and not go backwards, and know that that's okay.
Yeah. Well, and I'd like to pretend that resilience or that mental toughness was completely organic, but it wasn't. I think history over the last 20 years shows that it would have been just as likely that I would have packed it in at some point. And so I think being able to work with you, it's almost like you're a halftime therapist, because we'd be talking about those things. And for some reason in my mind, I'm ready for this sort of like gruff drill sergeant, trainer to drop the hammer about, you're not doing this enough, you're not doing that enough. But I think because you were always so chill, we talk about, we never said the words, but we were always talking about the leading indicators and the mindset that I was in and the behaviors we were working on. There was an entire phase where, if you remember, we just focused on eating slowly, right? Just chewing slowly, right? And just being aware and the mindfulness of, I'm eating, I'm enjoying it, I'm slowing down. Just creating the mindfulness by itself, I think, was helpful. But then it obviously, as most people are aware, means you don't eat as much, right? Because you're not like just machine gunning through your plate and then realizing that you've overeaten, and you're too full 10 minutes later. So that was something I would have never considered. It seems so small and inconsequential. But I think we probably went a month just focusing on eating slowly.
Yeah, we did. Because it's funny when you focus on something so small and inconsequential, how it actually brings a lot of things to the present, as you said. And funny how you mentioned the word therapist. There have been times when I've joked about being like a food therapist for people with other clients, but definitely maintaining that compassion and focus on, you call them lead indicators. So for those unaware of that kind of business term, it's of the actionable habits that you are in control of, right? That's what we always made sure to do. Laban, you mentioned that if you can't have a beer, you don't have a diet post, but was there any kind of event that happened that made you think, right now is the time?
Yeah, and it's funny, even though we sort of like, take the piss a little bit out of New Year's resolutions, people, and I always tell myself I'm not that person. I think it was, I'd had, I think, 3 international moves for work, which are fairly stressful, and I could specifically point to those in all of my weight measurements as being associated with weight gain. And I had a great phase at the end of the last 6 months in the UK of weight loss, and then I moved to Canada. Right, everything changes, your life changes, your habit changes, and I gained a bunch of weight back. And I had just gained kind of at a peak again, and I moved back to the U.S. and I just come out of the holiday season, so it was a combination of moving, everything's changing. I have no familiarity, and my weight's up at a max. Clothing is tight. And in fact, I think I dropped so many hints about working with you for 3 months that I think my partner Deanna finally just bought me the subscription just to shut me up. I think she guised it as a birthday present. No, I wouldn't be offended, but if it was the other way around, that might be a bit of a dicey gamble.
Wouldn't recommend it.
Yes, yeah. So being a bit cheeky, all the overwhelming shame of a normal January, I think, was finally the straw that broke the camel's back, and we started working together. So yeah, it was just almost a year ago, plus or minus a week.
And you said as well, Max was around 300 pounds, and that's about 136. I did the quick math when you mentioned it earlier, 136 kilos. How heavy were you when we started exactly, and where are you now, just for the listeners?
Yeah, so I started with you at 245 pounds. So you can divide that by 2.2. My previous low prior to working with you was about 220, right? So I was, that was about the more recent range I've been in the last 10 years. And then, working with you, I got down to 205, right? And I use that as an average, right? Yes, technically, did I weigh one morning at 203, but I'm trying not to mentally tether myself to that. But coming out of the holidays, that's the new goal, to get back below. So 40 pounds over the period of a year. I joked with my partner that had I had the opportunity to make a deal with the devil in January of last year, of saying you can either have a good year or you can have a really shitty year but lose 40 pounds, I would have chosen the 40-pound weight loss every day, right? Because it just feels so good and so liberating. And the little things like, a lot of people may not be able to identify with this, but when you're that overweight, you can't shop in a normal part of the store, right? You're especially if you're choosing European sizes, right? You're not being able to pick the clothes you want to pick because they don't have your sizes. And it's embarrassing, right? You don't want to go get clothes because, that's a source of shame, right? I need the larger size. And so those are the little things that have been so enjoyable. I mean, I had a situation where my clothes were so big for me that I needed to buy a new suit, but all the suit shops were closed because of COVID. Like, what a bizarre problem to have was I need smaller clothes because I've lost so much weight. And, and you're shopping for trousers, or you're shopping for shirts, and you're in the normal section, right? That just feels, that feels amazing. And I think that's the thing that, among other things, it's been so rewarding, as having those little moments of joy, along the way over the year.
Yeah, and that's a great thing to end the episode on. I'm sorry that you had to buy more clothes. I'm always sorry to my clients have to fork out to buy new clothes, but I guess what a feeling after it's been. And as you said, right, a lot of people would look at a pound, less than a pound a week, and think that's too slow. But then if you average that out over this year, you're like, wow, like, look at me now, and only more good things to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And you go from spending, your entire adult life of thinking yourself as being an overweight person that people are noticing. You suddenly realize you're walking down the street and you're just a normal person, right? You're a normal, fit person who exercises all the time, and that's a cool thing to be able to say, right? One of the upsides of going to the doctor was, talking about my health and him being so blown away that I'd lost 40 pounds, right? And my exercise routine is regular. I don't even think about those things, right? They're just part of my life now. And that's been so enjoyable. And it also makes me look forward to this next chapter of, getting into a maintenance, let's spend the next year getting down to something that feels comfortable, and then let's focus on maintaining that for a year, right? Because that's the next chapter.
Yeah, and then into a bit of muscle gain.
Yeah, exactly.
Get you filling out that suit. Cool. Laban, thank you so much for giving the time over today. I know you've got a lot on, especially as you're planning another move across the country. So I'll let you get on, but thank you very much.
Yeah, it was great. Enjoyed talking to you.